Federal Drug Enforcement Administration says a week-long cartel crackdown led to nearly 200 arrests just in New England. The DEA says they were all members of the Sinaloa Cartel, the largest drug cartel in the world.
What FBI agents have found inside some freight trains will stay with you forever. These weren't abandoned cars or wrecked trains. They were normal runs with normal manifests, moving through normal towns. But inside a few of them, something was deeply wrong. Some held scenes that were downright devastating. Others carried cargo worth more than the entire train itself. And a few loads had the power to wipe out an entire city. Locked in the dark, when people become the cargo. What happened near a small town in South Texas in early spring caught everyone off guard. On a warm afternoon in late March of 2023, a dispatcher in Uvalde County picked up a 911 call from an unknown number. The caller sounded weak and out of breath. He said he was locked in a rail car near the tiny town of Knippa. He did not know the mile marker, only that he was in a train, that it was very hot, and that people around him could not breathe. Police traced the signal to a Union Pacific freight train that had just passed through the area. There was no passenger coach and no special migrant train. It was just a regular freight train, packed with containers and boxcars, the kind that's supposed to be carrying goods, not people. Officers from Uvalde, sheriff's deputies, border patrol, and state troopers raced to catch up with it. They ordered the crew to stop the train a few miles east of Knippa on a stretch of track that cuts through brush and ranch land. When the train finally ground to a halt, officers walked the line of cars until they found the one the caller had described. From the outside, it looked normal. Painted metal, locked door, shipping seals, nothing strange. Then they heard it, faint banging from inside and voices yelling for help. They cut the lock and slid the heavy steel door open. Inside were 17 people. 2 men were already dead. The others were slumped on the floor and against the walls, struggling to stay conscious. Some could not stand. Some were barely able to talk. Emergency crews called in medical helicopters and ambulances. At least 10 people were taken to hospitals, with several flown to San Antonio for more advanced care. The scene inside the car looked nothing like a space meant for people. It was a steel box with no seats, no windows, and almost no air movement. Texas heat coming through the metal walls turned the car into an oven. Sweat soaked their clothes. The floor was slick. There was no bathroom, no water, and no way for anyone inside to open the door. All they could do was pound on the walls, shout, and hope a cell signal slipped out long enough for that one call. The next day, another call came in from the same border region. This time, it was not a moving train out in the country. It was a rail yard in Eagle Pass, Texas, right on the edge of the Rio Grande.
12 migrants were found in a rail car in Eagle Pass by Border Patrol. They were trapped for over 24 hours and suffered from heat exhaustion.
Someone inside a shipping container had managed to reach 911. When Border Patrol, local deputies, and the Eagle Pass Fire Department opened the container at the Union Pacific Yard, they found 12 migrants packed inside. 1 person was dead. The others were severely dehydrated and overheated after more than 1 full day in that sealed box. Again, from the outside, the container looked like every other steel box in the yard. This kind of scene shocks people when they see it on the news, but it is not new. In the summer of 1987, Border Patrol agents in the small town of Sierra Blanca, Texas, did a routine check on a Missouri Pacific freight train that had come up from El Paso. When they opened one locked boxcar, they stepped into one of the worst smuggling disasters in modern border history. Inside that car were 19 men from Mexico who had paid to be smuggled into the United States. 18 of them were dead. Only 1 man was still alive. The boxcar had been shut tight for roughly 14 hours as the train rolled and waited at railway stops in the desert heat. Temperatures inside reached around 120 degrees. The lone survivor stayed alive by using a spike to punch a small hole through the wooden floor so he could breathe air coming up from underneath the car. U.S. Customs and Border Protection has warned for years that smugglers use trains, along with trucks and car trunks, to move people who have no legal papers. At the border, the basic process is simple and cold. Guides lead groups through brush and ranch land to rail lines near towns like Eagle Pass, Laredo, and other crossing points. They wait for freight trains that slow down for crossings or yard work. In some cases, people climb aboard open cars. In other cases, someone with access to a yard or siding loads people into a boxcar, a grain car, or a special compartment on a rail car. The door is pulled shut from the outside and locked. Once that happens, the people inside have no handle, no latch, nothing they can use to free themselves. Border Patrol agents at Cartel Station in the Laredo sector checked a freight train rolling through South Texas. When they opened one compartment, they found 20 migrants locked inside with no way to get out on their own. A few days earlier, agents in the same sector rescued 23 migrants from another locked train compartment near Cotulla on a day when outside temperatures were close to 100 degrees. In both cases, the people inside depended completely on someone outside deciding to open that door. Once those people are safe, or in the worst cases, taken to the morgue, the focus shifts. A sealed railcar with bodies in it is more than a tragic scene. It is a crime scene. The next question is, who set this up? That is where federal investigators, including the Federal Bureau of Investigation, start to play a bigger role. The FBI's work on what it calls transnational organized crime focuses on groups that operate across borders and run complex schemes for money, using routes and systems that cross many states and even many countries. Human smuggling and human trafficking are part of that picture, and the Bureau works side by side with the Department of Homeland Security, U.S. attorneys, and foreign partners to go after the people at the top, not just the drivers or low-level guides. A single railcar case can give agents a lot to work with. Phones collected from survivors can show call logs, contact names, and chat threads with the people who arranged the trip. Messages can point to safe houses near the tracks, pickup points by bridges or highway crossings, and money transfers sent by relatives back home. Survivors can tell investigators where they crossed the river, who guided them through the brush, and what kind of vehicle brought them to the railroad. Agents then start to connect those details to earlier cases. Maybe another group rescued from a train near Cotulla gave the same phone number, or described the same stash house with the same colored gate. Over time, patterns start to emerge. It isn't always people behind those doors. Sometimes, when a rail car is opened, what's inside flips the situation entirely and turns it into a very different kind of case for the agents on scene. Drugs and guns on the rails. For drug cartels and cargo thieves, freight trains are a quiet supply line. The cars look normal. The paperwork looks normal. What sits inside can be worth more than the whole train, and the people trying to move it count on the fact that almost nobody is looking. In San Antonio, Texas, a dog sat down beside one rail car during a routine check. Local police were helping search a freight train that had just passed through the city. On paper, nothing about the line of cars looked unusual. The manifest said the load matched what the rail company expected. Still, a narcotics dog with the city police and a federal drug task force locked onto one car and would not move. When officers opened it, they found more than 500 pounds of methamphetamine, packed and hidden with regular freight, with an estimated street value of over $1 million. Drug cartels like freight because trains can carry huge amounts of cargo across several states with very few stops. Another case showed how far that idea can go. In Warren, Ohio, in the middle of the last decade, workers at a rail-linked distribution yard began checking a group of brand-new Ford cars shipped up from Mexico by train. The vehicles looked just like any other shipment of new sedans. But when workers opened the trunks and checked the spare tire wells, they found tightly packed bundles of marijuana hidden inside dummy spare tires. In that case, about 15 cars, mostly Ford Fusion sedans and one Lincoln, had been loaded in Mexico and shipped north on normal auto carrier rail cars. Each car carried around 30 or so pounds of marijuana. Federal agents said the total load was close to 500 pounds, with a value near $1 million on the street. The methods keep changing, but the idea is always the same. Investigators in Central Asia, for example, have documented false floors and hidden spaces in cargo headed across borders by rail. In auto trains, as the Warren case showed, the drugs can ride inside door panels, spare tire spaces, and other cavities in brand-new cars. The people who plan these moves often need help from inside the legal side of the supply chain. Cargo experts and federal task forces say that warehouse workers, rail yard staff, or trucking firm employees sometimes tip smugglers off about which trains carry the most valuable or least watched loads. That same blind spot that hides drug loads also helps thieves. Agents have opened cars that should be packed with goods, only to find them completely empty. In the deserts of California and Arizona, thieves spent more than a year hitting long freight trains run by BNSF Railway and walking away with more than $2 million in new Nike sneakers. In one robbery near a remote stretch of track in Arizona, thieves cut an air brake hose so the train would lose air pressure and come to an emergency stop. While the train sat in the dark, crews climbed on board, opened targeted containers, and tossed boxes full of unreleased Nike shoes off the cars to waiting vehicles. That one load alone was worth over $400,000 and held nearly 2,000 pairs of shoes that had not yet reached stores. Federal complaints describe at least 10 heists on similar freight trains in the Mojave Desert since the previous spring, almost all aimed at Nike shipments. Investigators say the thieves had scouts watching trains that moved along tracks near an interstate highway. Those scouts sometimes had inside help from people in warehouses or trucking firms who knew when high-end shoes were moving. Cargo experts who study these cases point out that this kind of theft costs far more than just the lost product. According to the Association of American Railroads, thefts from trains cost the 6 largest freight railroads in the country more than $100 million in a single year. That number includes both stolen items and damage to cars and brake systems. The same report said cargo theft didn't just rise on trains, but across the entire supply chain. In a single year, cases jumped by roughly 40%, reaching around 65,000 incidents nationwide. Guns have also moved in and out of freight trains in ways that scare agents far beyond the cost of the load. In Chicago, in the middle of the last decade, thieves broke into a rail yard and stole more than 100 rifles from a single freight car after cutting through locks.
That extends over to the 11th district, so it's going to be difficult to secure this train, but we'll do our best.
For the Federal Bureau of Investigation, these rail stories are pieces of a bigger picture. The Bureau calls cargo theft a gateway crime because the same people who break into containers and rail cars often connect to wider networks that handle drugs, fraud, and sometimes even terror funding. Agents know that when people cut into a train in a remote area or slip a drug load into a sealed car, they rarely do it alone. There is often a planner, a seller, a driver, and someone to move the money. When a rail seizure happens, a major part of the work begins after the drugs or stolen goods are pulled off the car. Agents and analysts start with simple things: bills of lading, container numbers, and train data to see where the rail car has been and where it was opened or loaded. They pull phone records from people arrested near the train and look for patterns, repeated calls to certain numbers near the border, or to warehouse workers in shipping hubs. Bank records and wire transfers can show who paid for the shipment and who collected money after past loads arrived. Over time, what began as a single train bust on one line can turn into a map of a whole group's rail use, which routes they favor, which yards they touch, and how often they move product by train instead of truck. Rail theft and drug loads are not just a United States problem. In Central Asia, where rail lines link Afghanistan's opium fields to markets in Russia and beyond, trains are an important part of the heroin trade. A United Nations study on opiate trafficking in the region noted that in one case in 2009, Uzbek authorities seized about 278 pounds of heroin that was meant to be shipped by rail to Russia. The same report describes how traffickers sometimes build hidden spaces into cargo or even strap drug packages under rail car axles with magnets, so nobody on board sees anything. Those tricks sound far from a Texas freight yard or an Ohio car lot, but the logic is the same. Trains cross borders and state lines with very few stops. Rail traffic tends to be heavy, and every added inspection slows down a system that carries coal, grain, chemicals, consumer goods, and almost everything else a modern economy needs. Smugglers count on that pressure. They know it is not realistic to empty and search every car on every train, so they hide inside the gaps. That is why the FBI and other federal agencies push for joint work on rail cases. The Bureau teams up with Homeland Security investigations, customs agents, local police, and even private rail police forces. Together, they build task forces that can follow a dirty load all the way from a switch yard in one state to a storage unit or stash house in another. They also share data with cargo tracking networks that watch for repeat patterns, such as the same group of thieves hitting trains near an interstate over and over, or repeated drug loads hidden in the same type of car on the same route. Stopping those loads cuts into profits and keeps some guns and drugs off the street. But there is another kind of freight that worries them even more, because it is not just about money or stolen goods. It is about what happens if a train that looks normal is quietly pulling enough dangerous material to turn a small town into a fireball or a toxic cloud if anything goes wrong. The cargo that can wipe out towns. On one freight train in the spring of 2023, one covered car was loaded with what looked like plain white pellets. Then the train finished its trip, the car was opened, and all of it was gone. The load had started in Cheyenne, Wyoming. The shipper, a company called Dyno Nobel, filled a single hopper car with about 61,000 pounds or 30 tons of ammonium nitrate, a common fertilizer that farmers use to feed crops. The only signs left were some clumps stuck to metal and a light coating of powder. Railroad officials and federal regulators believed the bottom gates on the hopper car were not fully closed. As the train rolled across the West for roughly 2 weeks, vibrations slowly shook the pellets out onto the tracks over hundreds of miles. No large theft ring was found. There was no sign that someone had cut into the car. It probably just leaked. That explanation eased one fear, but it did nothing to calm another. Ammonium nitrate is not just any fertilizer. Mixed with fuel, it turns into a very strong bomb. The truck bomb that destroyed the Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City in 1995 used several thousand pounds of the same chemical and killed 168 people. So when investigators heard that a normal freight train had carried 30 tons of that same fertilizer across several states, and nobody even noticed it was missing until the end of the trip, they did the math in their heads. If someone had found a way to pull even a fraction of that load off the train, they would have had enough material to build more than one large bomb. It was a simple, ugly thought, but it stuck. That one car is a window into a bigger, quieter world most people never see. A huge share of the dangerous chemicals that keep modern life running move by rail in the United States. Congressional and safety reports note that freight trains carry industrial chemicals, fuel, and gases that can burn, explode, or choke people if they escape. Some tank cars hold chlorine, the same gas once used as a weapon in old wars. A leak in open air can burn lungs and eyes. In a closed area, it can be deadly. Other tank cars carry anhydrous ammonia, a gas farmers inject into soil as fertilizer. It is also very dangerous to breathe. Vinyl chloride, a chemical used to make plastic, moves in long white tank cars as well. If it burns or leaks, it can form a toxic cloud and leave long-term health risks behind. This cargo usually moves without trouble. Industry groups like the Association of American Railroads point out that the rail system delivers almost all hazardous shipments without any release caused by a train wreck. They say more than 99 out of every 100 rail hazmat loads reach their endpoint without a major incident.
People recognized that if you have a rail and a wheel, the rolling resistance.
But when something does go wrong, it goes very wrong very fast. In East Palestine, Ohio, in February of 2023, a Norfolk Southern freight train derailed. Several tank cars carrying vinyl chloride caught fire, while others were vented and burned off in a controlled release. The fire sent a huge black plume into the sky.
Some train hoppers and their dog caught in a high-security area early this morning.
Forced thousands of people to leave their homes for days and left residents afraid of their air and water long after the flames died out. That crash was an accident, not a crime. Even so, it showed what a single freight train full of chemicals can do to a small town in a single night. On top of accidents, there is another layer that keeps security teams awake. Terrorist groups have long liked transport systems as targets. A Department of Homeland Security threat paper noted that the Madrid commuter train bombings in 2004 and the London subway attacks in 2005 showed both the intent and the ability of groups linked to al-Qaeda to hit rail systems.
To make sure that we are getting criminals, terrorists, foreign terrorist organizations.
That same assessment said that the United States passenger and freight rails are attractive targets because they are open to the public and hard to fully guard along their entire length. Most of the world's big rail attacks so far have hit passenger trains and stations, because that is where the crowds are. Bombs there kill by blast and shrapnel. Freight trains add another kind of fear. If a bomb or sabotage hits a train that is pulling tank cars loaded with poisonous or flammable chemicals through a city, the blast could punch holes in those cars. Now the weapon is not just the bomb, it is the cloud that comes out of the tank. Because of that, a lot of work on the security side happens before a train even moves. Federal rules from the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration say that companies that ship or carry certain high-risk chemicals by rail must have written security plans. Those plans have to cover things like who can access trains, how people are trained to spot threats, and how to guard information about where dangerous loads are going. Employees who handle this cargo must be trained not only in safety, but also in simple steps to keep it out of the wrong hands. On the rail side, industry groups say the big freight companies have their own security and cyber teams who watch for threats, monitor trains, and run drills with police and fire departments. They track high-risk hazardous cars by number and by route. Dispatchers and security staff can see where certain tank cars are in near real time and can change routes or speeds if there's a problem ahead. Thanks for watching. Now check out the videos popping up on screen for more unbelievable stories.